Maybe starting a business sounds great, but man, having to come up with everything from scratch just seems like overwhelming. Isn't there an easy way to just buy into a system and execute it? Well, you know what? There is. It's called franchising, buying a franchise, and that's what we're going to explore today on the Retirement Answer Man Show. I am your host, Roger Whitney. If you're new here, this is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but to rock retirement. And we are in the middle of exploring entrepreneurism in retirement or later in life. That's what we've been doing all of June. And today we're going to talk about franchising. So excited to be back in the saddle after my crazy Mongolia trip. Hopefully by the time you hear this, I will have a highlight video to give you a taste of what Mongolia looks like. But today, we're going to be diving into franchising. So what we're going to do is sort of define what franchising is and then talk to an expert, an attorney who works exclusively with franchisees and franchisors, Josh Brown, who is a great resource to explore whether this is really an option for you if you're looking to become an entrepreneur, but you don't want to have to create everything from scratch. Now, we can't do any of that, though, until we get to that all-important disclaimer. All right, it's time for that all-important disclaimer. Hey, and this is real simple. If you're new here to the show, is don't take advice from me on the show. In fact, I only give advice to clients that I work with as a financial advisor because I'm a fiduciary to them because I'm a fee-only advisor. And you wouldn't want to take advice from me anyway because I don't know anything about you. So before you make any decisions, make sure you talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor because that's just common sense. Now let's go define what exactly is a franchise. So before we get into whether a franchise is something that you should seriously consider, let's set the stage and talk about what exactly is a franchise and what do we need to know about them. So first, some quick statistics on franchises. There are about 3,000 different franchisors or companies operating in the U.S., and it's estimated that there are over 900,000 franchise businesses across a lot of categories. So this is a big space. It's very common that you probably shop at a lot of quote-unquote franchise stores. As an example, it's estimated that the franchise industry accounts for about 50% of all retail sales in the United States. So franchises are everywhere. So the top industry for franchising is fast food, and the top franchise company, which is the iconic McDonald's, is obviously the biggest success, but it's going to be a lot of retail that you see as a franchise model, whether it's a sub shop, whether it's a school tutoring store, things like that. Usually those are a franchise model. So let's talk about what exactly is a franchise. Now I'm going to say this, never having owned a franchise. I am an entrepreneur and business person, but I got my own business and I'm building it from scratch. So what exactly is a franchise? Let's use McDonald's as an example. And if you watch the movie about McDonald's, it's called Founder, which is about Ray Kroc and his journey from taking the original McDonald's, which were owned by two brothers, and sort of taking it over and building it into the major franchise powerhouse that it is. That movie will give you a good idea of the franchise model. It was sort of a depressing movie for me, actually. It didn't make me walk away feeling like a big Ray Kroc fan, but there's a lot of good entrepreneurial lessons in there. But the whole idea of a franchise is that the franchisor, the person that has the franchise to sell, they create a business. Let's say McDonald's. They have a store which has branding, it has uniforms, it has food, it has all the things that you would need to run a business. And in an ideal situation, that original store will perfect its model. Like take McDonald's, right? Once the model was perfected, rather than go open up a second and third store as the business owner, another option they have is to sell a franchise or sell the model to someone else. So in McDonald's case, if you're willing to spend a significant amount of money and they accept you they will say, okay, if you open up a franchise store for McDonald's as an example, we will give you the entire system. We'll help you with joint marketing. We'll give you the products, meaning in this case, the hamburgers and the buns and the French fries and everything else. We'll give you uniforms and manuals. We'll coach you on how to implement the system. We'll help you with the payroll. I mean, it can be a soup to nuts system. And by paying the franchisor a fee up front, and that can range anywhere from, $100,000 all the way up to $1 million. By paying that fee, you get to buy the system. They'll help you find the location, sign the lease, or build the building and everything else, coach you through that entire process, give you the supply chain, help you with all the regulations and everything else. And then all you're left to do as the entrepreneur is actually execute the process that's already been perfected. So as a result, statistically, someone that buys a franchise statistically ends up being a lot more successful than someone that just starts everything on their own, because then got to figure out the products, how the menu should look, the branding, the supply chain, how to pick a good location, how to negotiate a lease, all that other stuff, right? So the whole idea of buying a franchise is you're buying a system, not just simply a business. You're buying a system and a lot of times coaching that's going to help you through the entire process. So that's the concept of franchising, and it's been wildly successful in America, and McDonald's is a perfect example of that. So some of the guardrails of buying a franchise is you're going to have potentially very large startup costs depending on the franchise that you're buying. You're going to have all the legal agreements between you and the person selling the franchise, which can be a whole quagmire in itself, and Josh may talk to that a little bit. You're going to have potentially very large upfront costs. You're going to have to pay them, plus the cost of setting up the system. And then many times, or actually almost all the time, you're going to have royalties or ongoing costs that you pay the franchisor. Usually it's about 4 to 8% of revenue that you pay them in perpetuity for the right to be a franchisee of that particular model. You have good examples are Domino's, Little Caesars, a lot of fast food for sure. And when you buy a franchise, you're going to have a lot less creativity because they're going to have guidelines because they're protecting the entire brand. So think of McDonald's again. If you buy a McDonald's franchise, you're going to have to put on the menu what they say to put on the menu. And if you want to add something, they're probably not going to let you because it's not part of the system. So it's a lot less about creativity and entrepreneurism. And it's a lot more about, hey, they've perfected this model. And that's a big assumption. That's part of the evaluation process. I'm just supposed to implement the model. So you're going to have a little less creativity. You're probably going to have some controls on where you can put the store. And if you want to expand, there's going to be additional costs with that. And the contracts can be really complicated. So this is part of the deal of getting a ready-made business that you have to execute on. Later, I think I recommended the book E-Myth a few weeks ago. They talk a little bit about you want to be franchise ready, meaning that you want to have so much systems and processes in place that it can be duplicated very easily. When you buy a franchise, and Josh may touch on this in our discussion, one of the things that you're relying on is that the organization or person selling you the franchise has actually perfected the model and will execute on their portion of helping you find the location in a timely manner and not just simply collect your fees. There are some, I've watched, some of these shows, The Profit, Shark Tank, shows like that, which are great shows to watch, by the way, if you're interested in entrepreneurism. Fantastic shows, actually. And you can see sometimes, especially in The Profit, where he'll go in and talk to a company and they're already selling franchises, which means people are paying them a lot of money up front and they're not really delivering on the promises and they hadn't really perfected their system. So it's you got to be careful because you're buying into the fact that you think these people have their act together and they're going to be able to execute on giving you the system to be successful. There are definitely some cautionary tales out there, and maybe Josh will talk about that. So that is basically what we're talking about as a franchise. So who would a franchise be good for? Like some of the attributes are similar to, any entrepreneur. You got to be self-motivated. You got to be a self-starter. You got to be a strong leader. You got to be a strong teacher because you're going to implement a system. If you're given the system from the franchisor, then you're going to have to be able to communicate that system and get it implemented in all your employees. Probably be good to have a good understanding of the industry. And I think the key is you want to have those guardrails and you just want to implement the system and not create your own. So I think those are some important attributes to have if you're interested in becoming a franchisee. Also, you're going to need to have the capital, and you're going to have to be willing to walk the journey of building a business that way. Now, the average age of somebody that purchases a franchise or runs a franchise, it's in the 45 to 54 age range. So it's generally more mature adults. But when we talk about franchises in retirement or later in life, I think it's important to note, and this is just my opinion here, is that this is a long journey or can be a long journey. It's not a side hustle business. It's not a personal service business. It's something you're going to really have to work to perfect and get it running, which can be a great journey, but it's going to cost you a lot of money that you may not recoup if it goes bad. And it's going to cost you a lot of time and heartache to get it all up and running. Now, you may get a jump start compared to a lot of things that we talk about, whether it's side hustle, consulting, building more of a lifestyle business where you can earn some money and still have time freedom. This is very different than that. So I think it's one of those things you really want to evaluate. Are you prepared to build this kind of business? Now, on the flip side of that, if you are, then this is the kind of business where it actually can have some value, some enterprise value that you could potentially sell or have an operator operate for you, but it's a longer journey. So again, I am not a franchise expert at all, but I wanted to give you the basics. So now let's go talk to someone who is to see what wisdom he can share with us. So we're going to talk with a friend of mine. His name is Josh Brown. He is a franchise attorney and founder of the law office of Josh F. Brown. You can find him at indyfranchiselaw.com, and we'll have a link to that in our show notes. So he's based in Indiana, but he is a national leader on franchise law, and the art of creating a franchise system, but also purchasing a franchise. And in his practice, he acts a lot like a consultant. He helps entrepreneurs identify and pursue good franchise opportunities. And I've known him for a while. He's a good guy. I trust him. So let's have a conversation with Josh to talk about franchises later in life. Josh, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks, Roger. Good to be here with you.
I already talked about how awesome you are, so we're just going to hop right into it. When someone's evaluating a franchise, you've walked this journey from both sides of the equation. What are some of the things you need to evaluate when you're looking at a franchise opportunity? Because there are thousands of them.
There's thousands of them. They're all over the place. And just like with many other businesses, some are good, some are not so good, and some are just downright awful. And unfortunately, I've seen all of that. But the first thing that you have to do, if you're somebody who's looking at a franchise, and this may sound basic, but it's really, really vital, is you got to figure out, is a franchise right for you? So what do I mean by that? Well, the very first thing you got to figure out is, do you have the mentality to work within a franchise system, which is the equivalent of saying, do you have the mentality to work in a system where you don't necessarily call the shots? And that can be tricky for some people because they think that, oh, I own my own business. You know, when you buy a franchise, it's an independently owned and operated business, but it's under the guidelines and operational structure and marketing structure of a franchised business. And so you have to follow their rules. And I'm always amazed at the number of people who they get into a franchise system, or when they reach out to me and I talk them through the ins and outs of the franchise system. You know, I may have spoken to them twice and they've already told me 20 things they want to change about the system. And I'm saying to myself, well, maybe, just maybe, you should just go do it yourself instead of buying into this system. Because usually, it's not to say a franchise will not listen to their franchisees, but just like with anything, you have to be a part of the system for a while. You got to build up that trust. You got to show them that, you know, obviously you're a worthy franchisee. You can't just come into a system with the idea that you're going to change a bunch of things about it.
Well, and the whole point is of buying a franchise, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're buying a system. That's part of why you're buying it, right? You want to be the executor, not the creative part of it to an extent.
That's right. But I think sometimes people get confused because they say they want to be the executor of it, but really what they're disguising or masking is that they just don't want to expend the energy to create it themselves. All right. I mean, because there's a lot of people who are good franchise candidates who have worked in another industry or for corporations for many, many years, or maybe they're a military veteran. It runs the gamut. But still, when you're evaluating these, even if it's a little bit later on in life, you can't confuse not wanting to do the work that goes into setting up your own business and confuse yourself and talk yourself into, well, that's why I want to go buy a franchise. No, if you're thinking about setting up your own business, you might want to think about, well, if I go the franchise route, it's not setting up my own business. It's actually following somebody else's business. And so, that would lead me to a second point, which is you got to make sure they have a really good system. There's, as we talked about a minute ago, it runs the gamut between, the franchises that most people think of, the McDonald's and Subway and these very, very, very large corporations, all the way down to franchise systems that have just a couple of locations or up and coming, growing. The average franchise system has under 50 units, if you think about that. The McDonald's of this world represent 5% or less of total franchise businesses. And while the restaurant sector is still by far, and I think always will be, the biggest part of the franchise space, there's a whole lot of other franchise businesses that aren't just running restaurants.
So at first, if you accept, okay, I'm cool with implementing somebody else's business structure and plan and system, right? I don't need the creative. I don't need to have my own logo. If that's a yes, then and I think of this when I'm evaluating an investment strategy is, everybody's going to sound good and sound like they have a great system, but who actually has a great system that I can implement, right? And if McDonald's is the gold standard, it can get really bad from there.
Well, yeah. And part of how you figure that out is you go and talk to people who are part of the system and you do your own investigation. It's like when you buy a business. Nobody in their right mind would just go buy a business because somebody walks up to them and says, hey, I've got this great business. It's done really well. You want to buy it? Well, no, you're going to go check it out. You're going to do, as they call it, the due diligence, right? You're going to check their tax returns. You're going to look into the background of the owners. You're going to see what kind of customers they have. All these things you want to do, you can translate that into what you would do in a franchise scenario where you want to look into their system. You want to talk to franchisees. With any franchise system, before you purchase, they have to give you what's called a franchise disclosure document. And it's a big honking document with lots of pages in it and lots of legal law talking language, as people like to say. And so, but within that is a lot of really good information that you can look at. One of which is it'll tell you their current franchisees in the system. It'll tell you franchisees who are no longer part of the system. And those are the people you want to call.
Oh, yeah.
You want to call people who aren't part of the system. There's a table in part of the FDD, which gives a tremendous amount of information because it tells you how many new franchisees have signed up. If it's a retail or if it has a build out component to it, how many are actually open and operating versus just signed up, how many people have left the system, how many people are in each state that they're in, how many are corporately owned versus franchise locations. Well, when you look at these tables, to me, that stuff's like gold because I can figure out a strategy as to where the franchise is going based on those numbers. As an example, if you see a franchise that has a bunch of locations and all of a sudden you see through these charts that over the last 2 years, the franchisor has gone through a process of trying to buy back a lot of them, that could tell you a lot about their corporate strategy and can be really insightful to let you know where you might stand if you buy into that system. What does that look like? So there's not just one or two things you got to do. You got to sort of, bring your A game and approach it like you would buy any business and not just assume that because they're a franchise and because they talk a good game, that it's going to be a great fit for you.
Yeah, and that's hard. Well, you tell me, do a number of people that purchase franchises, do they come from the corporate world or having not run businesses before and this is their first foray? Is that a normal thing to happen?
Yeah, that's a normal thing. There certainly are there's equity investment groups that, bring a different sophistication where they come in and they buy large amounts of franchises. But the typical, person who's going to buy a single franchise unit or perhaps a couple franchise units, a lot of times doesn't have any experience or background in ever owning a business. And that's why they're looking at a franchise. And so I think even though the franchise in theory has a system or has a structure that walks you through what you're supposed to do, I still think you need to look at your own experiences and what you've done and see what kind of skill sets transfer over. As an example, And this is just a very obvious example, but if you're the type of person who doesn't like to work with people, doesn't like to deal with people, you should never buy a restaurant franchise, right? I mean, or you should never buy a restaurant franchise where you are going to be the one running it. There's a lot of franchise systems where you can buy it and you don't have to necessarily run it, but you have to get a good person to run it. But you got to apply some common sense here and also look at what...
And also, I agree, that's 100%, right? Because if franchise is the ultimate of dealing with people, you also have to think of the age and educational level of the people you're dealing with, right? If you're buying a franchise for a tutoring service, you're going to be dealing with a different demographic than if you're buying a fast food restaurant where it's high school kids, right?
Well, sure. I mean, if you're buying, it's funny you say the tutor service. I just had somebody on who has a growing tutoring franchise. But yeah, if you're going to buy that kind of a franchise, at that point, you're looking at, okay, if there's a location component to it, what does that look like? How many tutors or teachers do I have to get in place? And then those franchisees are going to be the ones to go bring in the kids. But a lot of times you're dealing with younger kids. And then there's the component of dealing with parents and stuff like that. And so you have to bring a skill level to that. As an example, I could see somebody who was, let's say, a principal of a high school or something like that for 25 years, and now they've retired. And, perhaps they've always kind of wanted to start their own business. They might be a great candidate, if some of these other metrics lined up for them to go look at a tutoring type franchise because they come from the background. They're used to working with kids. They know motivational points for kids. They know how to deal with parents and teachers and tutors. All those kinds of skills can translate well. And so I think just getting that mindset of figuring out of, what have you done over the course of your career and how does that translate into a business model? Perhaps, and most importantly, can help you eliminate 99% of the franchises. Because one thing I find that's a big problem for people is they don't suffer from not finding systems. They suffer from finding too many systems. And then it's information overload. And when that happens, it gets very easy to make a bad decision.
Especially if you want to be diligent and go through these documents that you're talking about, the FTD, I think you referred to it as.
Yeah, FDD. So franchise disclosure documents. Okay. Yeah, it's a requirement. It's a bunch of legal documentation that, you should have your lawyer or a franchise lawyer go through those for sure. I always get people who say, well, I don't know if the franchisor is going to change anything, so why should I have a lawyer look at it? I said, it's not just about changing it; it's about understanding,
pulling out the wisdom part of. Someone like you who has looked at so many, they know where the red flags are and where the questions are to be asked.
That's right.
Yeah,
yeah. But it's a wonder. I mean, franchising is a wonderful thing to be a part of if it's right for you, and it's a horrible thing to be a part of if it's not right for you.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So in my mind, I think some people listening, they're in their 50s or 60s. Either they are retired or they got a corporate buyout or they may get one. And this is their in-between of, I'm going to take a good chunk of money. I'm going to finally start my own deal. What kind of journey is it from a work perspective?
Well, you mean when you say from a work perspective, talking about the legwork to get in, are you talking about time frame?
No, once I got it and I do all the work to set it up. Are most franchisees working in the business?
Yes.
So they're working
that's a big
misnomer.
This idea that buying a franchise is like buying a business in a box and you turn on the lights and, like if you remember the movie Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner was like, build it and they will come. It doesn't necessarily work that way. Yes, when you buy a franchise and they're a good franchise, they will have good strategies for grand openings, let's say, and for marketing strategies and social media strategies and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, in this world we live in, there is a lot of competition and you are going to have to be working your tail off to make it work. Now, that does not necessarily mean you have to be there all the time. That just depends on the system. But I can tell you this, if anybody tells you that you're going to buy a restaurant franchise and not work a tremendous amount of hours, they're lying to you. They are just flat out lying to you. Unless you're part of a larger group and you're owning a bunch of them and you have other people running those restaurants. We're just talking about here, the average person who's buying one or two locations.
Yeah, you're gonna be humping a lot. Yeah, you're gonna be humping it because otherwise, one, you got to get cash flow positive if you're starting one, and then you got to get so cash flow positive that you could actually hire someone to maybe eventually get to be that owner that walks in every week or so.
Can we talk about that for a second? Cash flow positive.
Let's talk about that.
All right, because that is the number one reason why franchisees fail. Is they don't have enough cash or they don't have the ability to get cash. So when you are buying a franchise, regardless of what the franchisor tells you, if you want to be conservative in your approach to it and give yourself a better opportunity for success, then you need to look at it as though from the moment that you sign up and actually open your store. Now, remember, there's a difference. In franchises where there's a build-out component in a retail location, usually there's a window of 120, sometimes 180 days between when you sign the franchise agreement to when you open. Because oftentimes you don't have your location picked out and you sign up and now you have a window of time to go get your location. I'm talking about from the time you open your location, you need to have enough money for a year's worth of expenses, factoring no revenue. What that really means is you need to have about a year and a half's worth of revenue, because the reality is a lot of times it's going to take 4 to 6 months to get you fully open. That may seem like a lot to people.
Yeah, let's paint that picture real quick, right? Okay, I'm excited to set up shop, start a business. I'm going to start the business. I'm going to pay the big upfront. I'm going to be working a lot of hours to get this up and running. Oh, and by the way, you're really not going to make any money for a year and a half if you're successful. I mean, it's easy to say, but mentally, it's a journey.
Well, that's how you need to mentally approach it, because if you paint that picture in your head and you pay attention to the business and you find a good franchise, chances are you might beat those metrics. You might beat that time frame. But wouldn't it be wonderful to be in the position where you didn't have to? Because then you don't have the pressure that crumbles and crushes so many franchisees who come in with their eyes wide open and with the dream and with taking their entire retirement, Roger, where they take their entire retirement and just load it into this one business. And next thing you know, 6 months later, they're out. It's horrible. I have clients who are dealing with this, and now they're in situations where they worked their whole life and they've invested into a system. And I either have to try to get them back funds, which is difficult, if there's a flaw in their system or if there's, different legalities that we need to look at. You look at those components. But at the end of the day, if you don't have money to do that, you're in a really bad position. And now you've got to figure out whether you're looking at a bankruptcy situation or not. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here, because I'm a very optimistic person, but I'm also a very realistic person. And at the end of the day, I would rather have somebody go in thinking about what's the worst case scenario so that they can surprise themselves in a positive way than go in with sort of this notion that everything's just going to work out.
Yeah. And as long as it all works out, it'll all be good. But if one little domino falls the wrong direction.
Yeah. And I am also not a big fan. I mean, I know it depends on every person's circumstance, but I'm not a big fan of just because you have a big retirement account going and taking the funds necessarily from those retirement accounts. I mean, there's wonderful SBA programs through banks that will give you tremendous percentages on loans and so forth. Or sometimes that makes a whole lot of sense, because at the end of the day, if you're taking it from your retirement, that's a very, very big gamble. So if you have, obviously I'm not a CPA, I'm not an advisor, and I don't ever pretend to be, but I think a combination of, if you're looking to make that kind of investment, figuring out a way to not just have one source for all of it, unless that source is big enough to withstand much more than the investment that you're about to make.
So let's end this on an upside.
Yeah.
If you do your due diligence and you find a good franchise system and you're financially prudent in how you get it, what's so attractive about it? What is it that you like about it?
What I like about it is that if you're part of a system that's a good system, you really are part of a team. And as a franchisee, as a small business owner, sometimes it can feel very isolating. If you're part of a franchise system that has really a good system, you really feel like you're part of this larger team where you have people you can reach out to and other franchisees, and usually people within the franchisor network, on their operational team that you can reach out to and bounce things off of. And so it very much has a good community feel to it. You can do well. You can own a business like a lot of people do. They then want to pass on to their children. A lot of people get into franchising later on in life because they want to help train their kids on the ropes of running a business for them to take it over. That can be a wonderful thing as well. And so you're dealing with, in theory, if it all works out, somebody else who's gone through a lot of the pain to figure out something that's viable, that has a market, that has a growth component to it, and that hopefully is doing well or doing good for your overall community. And I think that's something that can be very, very inspiring. I went to, it was like an outdoor, flower and patio show and so forth. And there's a lot of franchise businesses within there. I had at least like 5 or 6 people come up to me they're, hey, Josh. And I'm looking at them for a second. They look for me. They're like, hey, you helped me with this franchise, 7 years ago, whatever the case may be. And I'm like, oh, how's it going? Oh, it's fantastic. I love it. And that is so gratifying to see somebody who's done it. It's worked out for them and they're really happy about it. So there are good stories there. But again, in my line of work, so often you only hear the bad stories.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear those because you got to go in eyes wide open. Now, how do people connect with you, Josh?
Yeah, you can reach me at josh@indiefranchiselaw.com. You can call me 317-688-9111. Usually between the two, you'll definitely reach me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom.
Hey, thanks, Roger. Good to talk to you. Good to see you're doing well and keep up the great work.
All right, buddy. Hey, welcome to the Happy Lab, where we noodle on how to live a happy life. Nicole, have you watched the show Alone?
I have not.
It's pretty cool.
Remember, I'm a cable cutter.
That's right. It's on the History Channel, and they take 10 people, they plop them down. This time they're doing it in Mongolia, but they've done it in Patagonia and other places. And the people are totally alone, no film crew or anything else, and whoever survives the longest wins like $500,000. Pretty cool. So, and these are survival kind of people.
If there's no film crew, then how are they filming it?
They're filming themselves. They're given cameras and little tripods,
okay, cool.
And then someone picks up the film periodically. I can't imagine the editing that goes into that.
Wow.
But the reason I'm bringing that up in this entrepreneurial month is there was one guy in the one I'm watching. We're watching like season 3, which is Patagonia, who teaches survival stuff, talks about positive mental attitude, PMA, and everything else. And he's all excited going in. And then right at the end of day 2, he taps out.
Wow. Only on day 2?
Only on day 2. He just could not handle, I guess, being alone or the journey that he knew he was going to have to be on. But he was so excited at the beginning, even in day 1 and part of day 2, he was all into it. And then like that, he just said, oh my goodness, this is going to be horrible.
Wait, but how is that happy?
Well, I guess
we are in the happy lab.
Well, I guess the point is when we're talking about entrepreneurism, it's easy to get really excited about starting a business, having your own deal, buying a franchise, which we're talking about. It's easy when we're in the planning phase to get super excited and happy about something. But you got to make sure that it's really the journey you want to be on. Otherwise, it can make you really miserable, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like this guy, he was super excited about the potential of something, and very early in, he said, I'm out. And unlike him, it's not just getting on a sat phone and getting flown home. If you buy a franchise or you start a business, you're spending a lot of money, and it can be, you can feel obligated to stay on that journey. So I think make sure you're on the journey you want to be, because that's going to lead to a happier life. Did I wrap that up well? Now you get it?
Now I get it.
Okay.
Nicely done.
All right. Let's go set a smart sprint.
On your marks, get set.
All right, in the Smart Sprint segment, we set a 7-day goal to take a little baby step to create a great life. Okay, I got that right. So in the next 7 days, this is related to the Happy Lab because we're getting close to the end of Entrepreneurial Month, is in the next 7 days, really do some soul searching. If you have the entrepreneurial bug, do some soul searching on what kind of journey do you really want to be on as an entrepreneur. And I think a good way to think about that is, rather than focus on the excitement of it, ask yourself the question, to what end? Why am I doing this? Right? Because you don't need to bring out the big chainsaw when you're really just trying to break a twig, right? You want the right tool for the right job. So if you want to start a business, to what end? What is it you're trying to accomplish with it from a family perspective? I want you to really dive into that so you can get real with yourself and make sure you're not bringing a chainsaw to a twig breaking contest. Did I? You get the point, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us on the show today. I want to remind you, or no, actually, I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to go to YouTube/Retirement Answer Man and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you get to hang out with
me. See Roger being a goofball.
See me being a goofball. And you get to meet, he's becoming a reoccurring character, Sherlock, our Great Dane. in our videos. So you get to meet Sherlock. You get to see me being a goofball, but really you get to hopefully learn some cool things about how to rock retirement. So go to, YouTube.com/Retirement Answer Man. All right, Nicole, are you subscribed? Dang it.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I better see my subscriber tick up here in the next 5 minutes. All right, everybody, you have a wonderful week.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.